If you've ever played Red Dead Redemption 2, you may be aware of its tram network located in Saint Denis. Saint Denis has a very interesting tram network which would be really interesting to talk about. But first of all, let's talk about its depot, which it doesn't have. This is essentially a place to store and maintain vehicles, in our case, trams or a trolley if you're American. Now, in order for a tram network to work, you need a place to keep trams. That's just a fact. Especially considering this tram network runs all the time, day and night. If you thought the coal miners from Annisburg have it rough, take a look at these guys. They just stand here forever.
Absolute unit.
However, I think Rockstar still wanted to place a depot in the game. If you go over here, you can see it's very possible for track to fork into this dirt area. There isn't anything here apart from some benches. This area, however, could be a great spot for a depot, and it almost feels too perfect. It's actually rather flat, and there's a sort of rectangle shape here for a building. Maybe not, we may never know, but even if Rockstar did want to add this, they wouldn't really have any point to put it into the game. It doesn't change gameplay, it's just an extra layer of realism. Now, before we go any deeper into this tram network, I think it's important we talked a little bit about the lore as to why it's here. The lore is a little bit, misty. There's not too much information about it. But I'm now going to read the Red Dead Redemption wiki on these trolleys. And I'm going to be honest, there's not that much here, so I might just read the entire thing. If you don't want to hear about lore because you find it boring, I mean, I don't, but, it's pretty interesting and it's kind of short. But if you're not interested, then just skip to here. Okay. Trolleys, also referred to as trams or streetcars, are a form of rail vehicle public transportation that travels on tramway tracks in the city of Saint Denis in Red Dead Redemption 2. Trolleys are a form of capable car only found in the city of Saint Denis and are a symbol of the city's extensive modernization. Trolleys are used for the mass transit of civilians via cable lines strewn throughout the city, quite similar to trains, except trolleys operate... I think there's an error here. No, that's just me. Trolleys are much smaller and are typically used for shorter distance travel. Additionally, trolleys are free of charge and the player can board and leave whenever they please. However, I would just like to add, in the actual trolleys, there are these things, and I could be completely wrong, but they kind of feel like ticket bins, where you would place your ticket. So, I don't know, maybe Rockstar was going to add a fare system, but just didn't get around to it. And that also kind of makes me think, how does this network actually make any money? Trolleys operate two separate routes that cover the majority of the city, the red and the blue loop, which covers 8 stops. The red loop is generally the smaller one, and the blue loop is generally the larger one. I won't get into that right now because we're going to look at that later. Now, for the actual background, trolleys are a symbol of rapid technological growth of Saint Denis at the turn of the 19th century. Operated by the Cornwall City Railway Company, owned by industrial magnate Leviticus Cornwall, the trolley system was an ambitious project aiming to revolutionize public transport in the city. These sophisticated trams were an innovation that replaced the more traditional horse-drawn carriages, providing a faster, more efficient, and critically, a more consistent mode of transportation that operated regardless of weather, under most circumstances. I need my inhaler. There we go. Overall, I'm not gonna lie, I don't feel like this bit of lore is too, important, but essentially there was a snow blizzard, and for a little bit, they couldn't use the trams, they had to use horses and carriages. That's basically it. Then, when the player is introduced to the timeline in late 18th century, there are a few times the trolleys get mentioned in the story. The largest mention was in Chapter 4 in the mission Urban Pleasures, in which the gang tried to rob the Victory Street station only to find a very small amount of cash, and eventually an ambush by the law. They managed to get away, but they barely got anything out of it, and they are now wanted in Saint Denis. But what about the routes themselves? Well, in short, the network is a bit like a theme park version of a tram network, by which I mean it's very, very small. There is not that much track in the city, but to be honest, the city is actually more of a town. There are 2 routes that all loop round, which doesn't seem necessary as the trolleys have double-ended cabs, which means the driver can just go to the other end of the cab and kind of like make the trolley go in reverse, except they would face the way the trolley's going. So there isn't really any point for there to be these loops here. I guess, though, it does mean that the trams don't have to stop for a while the driver goes to the other end, but it still seems a little bit unnecessary. I would say the red route is more of the route the upper class will normally take. It's also the shortest route going from Harris Square to Million Avenue. Then in comparison is the 2 hours long blue route from Victory Street Station to Victory Street Docks. To be honest, though, I will say this network does go to places you would want to commute to, like the Industrial District or Leisure District. Even though the trams go slower than an actual snail, they do still have some kind of purpose. But what about the trams or trolleys themselves? Well, Rockstar based these trams off the New Orleans Regional Transit Authority 2000 series trolley cars, except the ones in the game are a lot wider and without the doors. However, these trolleys were built in the 1990s, so there is a large time difference. And Saint Denis is based off the real France city, Saint Denis, and that city has trams. I think Rockstar saw this and decided to add this to the game as well, only they based it off of New Orleans, very much like a lot of the electrical infrastructure you see in Saint Denis, funnily enough. The trams gain power through these pantographs or poles. Power goes in one end, through the tram, then back out the other end. I might not be 100% correct with that. If I'm not, let me know. I'm not an absolute nerd when it comes to how electrical infrastructure works, especially with how a tram would work. This thing on the front is a bell, and the tram even has this curved bulge on the front, which was a safety feature to prevent people turning to mincemeat if they were run over by the tram and fell under the wheels. There are controls in the driver's cab, but the driver only touches 2. We'll see a speedometer and what I assume is a voltmeter, then a reverser and throttle, and a few other controls I can't identify. The tram's interior has lights and wooden benches. So that's basically the tram's interior. There isn't really that much to cover about it, but just if people love tram interiors. Now we are going to look at some of the infrastructure you can find on the tram network, starting off with the electrical infrastructure. This means stuff like the wires, the poles, anything that looks electric. Overall, electrical infrastructure is pretty well made. The trams have pantographs and the wires produce electric sparks, which did happen with this old early stage of electricity. And what's really cool is all the wires are actually connected to the Lannick coal power plant. The poles are realistic with blue glass insulators, which was something that you would get in that kind of era. But sometimes there are poles that have another section for wires, but don't have any wires attached to them, which is weird. And then you've got wires that merge into each other at forks and switches, which in real life would be a bit more complex than the wires just merging into each other. Now, amazingly, this kind of technology where trolley poles could simply go through switches without having to be manually changed onto a different wire was invented around the time Red Dead Redemption 2 is set, which is such an amazing detail. How does the track infrastructure look? Well, put simply, it's pretty bad. Firstly, the rails have a weird error where the grooves in the rails are on the wrong side at times in the track, which would not work and realistically cause derailments. Speaking of derailments, some of these curbs are really, really tight for a tram like this, to the point where it might as well be drifting over the track. In fact, sometimes it actually does. I'm not even joking, the wheels will clip into the track sometimes. But what about the switches? Well, the switches are even worse because they're not even really switches. They're kind of just rails going through each other, and there's no actual switch or turnout slab here. Now, I would talk about the tram network's urban infrastructure, by which I mean its tram stops, and that's pretty much all there really is to talk about, which is why I don't think it's really worth talking about. Plus, I couldn't find any real life references to the urban infrastructure you find on the tram network. There are obviously pictures of the New Orleans tram network, which I'll put up now. Sadly though, and crazily enough, I couldn't find any pictures of the old stations from the 19th century, so I can't really use that as a reference to the stations you see in Saint Denis. You can tell Rockstar really did base Saint Denis off of both the real-life city Saint Denis as well as New Orleans from these pictures here. And I honestly think they did a really, really good job. And that's what makes the Tram network so interesting, because it's basically the outcome of this mix between a French and American city mixed into one, and then in a very small environment in a video game. Anyway, that's all I could find to talk about Red Dead Redemption 2's Tram network. Goodbye.